What else did he tell you about it, Reggie? Did he say anything? Did he cry?
Yeah. I thought Todd's eyes were going to pop out of his head. I've never seen him look that way. And they were red and rimmed, and I said, Todd, why? Why did you do this? You had everything. I gave you everything. And he says, they embarrassed me. He says, they made me feel so bad.
Now, she says all he wanted was to be taught how to ride a motorcycle, and she says his rage and inability to control his anger led him back to that shop for revenge.
Good morning, Paula. It's what so many here have feared since that missing woman was found. That seemingly successful realtor now suspected of being a serial killer. Investigators this morning saying Todd Kohlhepp could be responsible for at least 7 killings.
We talked to yet another person. This is a Waffle House employee who says there was a creepy vibe here. Man, I feel like we've heard that 100 times now.
Creepy or aggressive, arrogant, those are the 3 words that I've heard describe Todd.
He seemed like a go-getter. He talked about himself a lot, how he had learned a lot from another real estate company. He talked a lot about like the apocalypse and building a survival bunker, the guns and ammunition.
The woman says he often commented on her looks and tried to get her to come over to his home where his real estate business was based. She refused and later quit her job after just 3 weeks.
He was a different bird, but he was a good salesman. It was very much about him. He was definitely one of those people who liked himself a lot. You really never know who the monster is standing next to you.
In this episode, we will take a deep look at the titular character, his troubled youth marked by deeply rooted antisocial behavior, which would eventually lead to a diagnosis of borderline and narcissistic personality disorders. Ambivalent and violent, he would amble through life alone, creating self-imposed isolations through his naively aggressive interactions with his peers. After serving a 14-year sentence as a teen in adult prison, he would play his role as the snake in the grass until his capture in 2013 in this, part 1 of the Todd Kohlhepp Trilogy, with Something Criminal. Todd Christopher Kohlhepp was born to parents Regina and William on March 7, 1971, in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. An only child, Todd was thrust into a chaotic home life at first breath. Regina and William were an unlikely couple caught in an unplanned pregnancy. Their relationship was destined to fail long before conception, and they both knew it. Before Todd had cleared the terrible twos, Regina and William had split. Todd would stay with his mother, who moved them from place to place and state to state. William suddenly became the estranged father. The pair would spend some time bouncing around in Georgia before moving to Spartanburg in South Carolina. With no fixed address for any meaningful amount of time, Reggie's lack of a stable home, job, and environment would undoubtedly have a negative effect on Todd. Infants are extraordinarily susceptible to trauma. Outside the obvious means, a relatively new field of research based on old truisms suggests that everything factors into an infant's development. Right from birth, the efforts of the parents or parent, the financial stability of the home, quality of food and bedding, and even the necessity for a static environment all contribute to the infant's first impressions on life. It goes without saying now, but stability in all its forms is a key building block of a healthy child. Sometimes enough, sometimes not. When absolutely needed, she would rely on family for support, like any single mother would. And Todd's grandparents were ready caregivers, owners of a large farm with acres to roam free from the temptations of the city. This rustic environment might have been perfect for the vagabond pair. But, like most single parents, there is a desire, the need even, to make it on their own, however difficult. For Regina, the farm was a treat and absolute last resort. Todd has made later life allegations that his grandfather was abusive to both him and his mother. He says his grandfather would be verbally abusive and belittling, that he would sometimes hit them, and once struck them with an electric cattle prod. This has never been substantiated. Under record, Todd's grandparents were nothing but supportive, and the interactions between them contradict the later accusations. In 1974, Regina married a Karl Kohlhepp, who had 2 children of his own from a previous marriage. Karl was a bit old-fashioned, clinging to the age of discipline where the back of a hand or sting of a strap was still acceptable. The cause and physical effect approach, with Todd at least, was almost a daily routine. The young child became increasingly unresponsive to the lessons. This physical discipline did nothing more than plant the seed for a growing defiance and teach Todd a twisted relation between emotion and violence. His method of parenting didn't define Karl. He was still a caring man in his own right, and a focused father, although the extremities of his parenting could be very polarizing. Reggie may not have been any better. She was still a product of the 60s, a rolling stone with some moss gathered. Her heart was in the right place, but her head may have been miles away. When Todd was 5, Karl would adopt him as his own son. For Karl at least, they were always family. This title did little to change the way he interacted with Todd. At some point in 1979, Karl's ex-wife and mother to his biological children took full custody of the 2 siblings, leaving Todd as an only child. This might have built a stronger relationship between Todd and Karl, but Todd would never fully accept him as his father, later citing alleged physical and mental abuse. This unproven abuse and everything in between would fester in Todd and manifest itself in increasingly unpredictable and explosive behavior. Not limited to his home, this bled into nursery, preschool, and eventually elementary. Todd would habitually hit other students, wreck their projects, or destroy their property, the schools included. Todd's defiance to authority was not limited to home. As Todd grew older, he became even more malicious, shooting a dog with a BB rifle and poisoning a fish tank with bleach. Even from an early age, Todd was exhibiting the trademark traits of an emotionally scarred child with violent, antisocial behavior. Parental discipline for Todd seemed almost perpetual, and the difference in mentality between Regina and Karl over how to deal with it caused many rifts in their already tumultuous marriage. They would be in constant battles, usually over Todd's defiant nature or something he had done. At first, the fights would be surrounding their son, eventually falling away to battles around her son. Regina and Karl would separate often, even divorcing, although they remarried a short time after. While together, Regina and Karl would allegedly seek help for Todd. An almost revolving door of doctors, counselors, and psychologists, prescriptions that may or may not have been taken. The couple would claim they tried everything, from the hand to the stick, or vice versa. Nothing seemed to help. If Todd's home had become one of stability and a nurturing environment, as Reggie claims it eventually became, it was either too little or too late. Todd seems stuck in a cyclic trend of violence and opposition. December 8, 1982, and Reggie and Carl make the difficult decision to send Todd for psychological observation after a string of violent outbursts at school and his continued inability to interact with literally anyone. Dr. William M. Baker was the attending psychologist to Todd during his 3-month stay at the Georgia Mental Health Institute, located just outside Atlanta. In his post-evaluation, Dr. Baker writes, while Todd displayed key trademarks of imminent social disorders, he also inconsistently displayed signs of improvement. Initially, Todd was disruptive during sessions, abrupt, self-centered, and naive about how his actions were affecting others. But he would slowly adapt to the situation, unusually complimenting others instead of lashing out, only to quickly regress back into his oppositional behaviors. Ultimately, Dr. Baker would feel there was hope for Todd, and that given the right environment and Todd's own decision to change, he could overcome his current challenges. Todd would be prescribed Ritalin, but complained of side effects, most of which were subjective. Doctors tried Thorazine next, a potent neuroleptic antipsychotic that was usually reserved for more severe cases of schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or psychosis. Thorazine is known to reduce feelings of aggression and help patients think with a clearer, more collected frame of mind. Todd seemed to respond much better to this medication. However, it's unclear how long the prescription continued, if at all, after returning home on May 12th of 1983. This year, Todd would be held back a grade, largely due to concerns over Todd's ability to get along with other students and teachers. Reggie and Carl received Todd back into hopeful arms, but it was immediately apparent there was no lasting change. In continued acts of defiance, Todd cut up his new clothes with scissors and hid the scraps under a couch, was caught smashing a young neighbor's head repeatedly into some clay piping, and had successfully been kicked out of every club he had joined because of his disruptive behavior and violent outbursts. Summer of 1983, defeated and now convinced Todd's defiance is placed in not knowing his real father, Reggie calls William. She suggests he take Todd for the summer to give them both an opportunity to bond, to help bridge that gap between estranged family, and hopefully fill the void Todd felt he had. Having not seen his son since he was adopted by Carl at age 5, William is eager to meet his almost teenage progeny, and Todd leaves for Tempe, Arizona, almost immediately after the last day of school. Tempe in the 80s was a burgeoning outskirt city. Around 20 minutes drive from Phoenix, it is located south, just across the Salt River. A desert oasis, Tempe boasted a multitude of family restaurants, theaters, a surf park, and accompanying amusement park, all of this in stark contrast to the classical green fields and farm town mentality of Spartanburg County. Tempe was new and exciting. Todd took to life in Arizona right away and had apparently found the connection he was missing with Father William. They seemed to be kindred spirits, and William was overjoyed to be spending time with his progeny. For William, he was able to bestow upon his son all the things a part-time father would, doing all the things the guys would do, shooting guns in the desert, blowing things up with dynamite, making model planes, and staying up late talking. Real man-to-mans. Todd had finally found a friend, someone unconditional, and briefly, the best parts of him began to shine. Todd was convinced he needed to stay. Summer is over, and despite his months of reprieve, Todd returns home to Reggie and Carl, even more defiant. Regina and Carl had planned a glorious return for Todd, remodeling his room from its humble beginnings with new furniture, a new bed frame and mattress, a desk and clothes drawer. This peace offering of sorts, a fresh room for a fresh Todd, were sadly met with destruction. While in a fit of rage inspired by a newfound separation anxiety, Todd destroyed his newly renovated room with a hammer.
She for me that I couldn't move, couldn't go live with my dad because I had brand new furniture. I was mad. I just smacked everything with a hammer. Hit the table, hit the dresser. I bent a piece of the headboard. I was mad and I wanted to leave.
This would be the final straw for Carl. Ultimately, Todd was too much to handle, and Regina and Carl would separate and divorce one last time, late in 1983. The next few months became increasingly difficult for Regina. Todd was determined to live with his biological father in Tempe, throwing almost perpetual tantrums, threatening suicide and even the life of his mother. She would eventually submit, defeated once again, and in 1984, when Todd was 12, he proudly left his desperate mother to live with William. A last blow to Reggie, Todd took William's last name, Samsel, when he moved. At first, Todd and William got on great, as they did in the summer. But as the real world started to unfold, William's expectations went from the carefree days of summer to scholastic months of education. Todd was agreeable at first, and William claims he changed his lifestyle entirely to accommodate Todd as the parent he felt he should be. He says he was home every night to cook dinner and help Todd with schoolwork. He checked in with his teachers on a constant basis, that he did his best to ensure a stable environment for his son's growth. With the hopes that the labors involved in earning a dollar would help teach Todd the value of honest work, William gave Todd a job dishwashing at his restaurant, the once-upon-a-time Tempe favorite, Billy's Famous for Ribs.
Welcome to Billy's Famous for Ribs.
By William's account, he only ever acted with the best interest of his son in mind. William's attentiveness would be put in question more than once. Neighbors, teachers, people who knew Todd, and even Todd himself, would later comment on how frequently he was left at home. It could be argued that William may have been working late, grinding away as a small business owner would. Or perhaps he was out with one of his alleged many girlfriends on the multi-day benders, Todd would later suggest. Todd would agree that when home, William tried to father him, weak attempts that Todd would sometimes play along with, and other times fight, with often destructive results. Todd and his mother Regina surprisingly built a stronger relationship through the distance. Todd would call her at least once a week, and write her letters often. As time went on and Todd began to miss home with his mother, he would ask her if he could come back. Reggie would hesitate, making excuses or telling him that she still needed to work on herself. Forced to stay, Todd enrolled at McClintock High, Tempe's second largest school in the late 80s. It boasted a superb faculty and outstanding athletics department. With a star football team and state bar-setting academics, the high school campus was alive with hungry students. Todd was a noted underachiever who rarely attended class, but still managed to score 118 on the state-mandated IQ tests, moderate to moderately high. Todd seemed uninterested in school and the people in it. He had a very small circle of friends, a term used weakly at best. His trademark way of belittling those around him and aggressively pursuing his desires ensured that any would-be friends were kept at arm's length. If he wasn't talking down to someone, he was bullying them. This interaction seemed to be Todd's natural way, perpetual in occurrence. A neighbor to Todd with a younger child recalls how she would often find Todd terrorizing her son, one time locking him in the dog kennel and rolling him down the street. Todd would never truly understand why he had so few friends. He could not place their dislike for him, and it weighed heavily on him. He would talk to both Reggie and Will about his lack of friends, and they tried to tell him. Todd was in denial. He could not hear what they were saying, or chose not to, and he continued recklessly on his way, unaware that damage he felt he was dealt was largely self-inflicted. November 25th, 1986, Todd is home alone with Father William out and not expected back anytime soon. He mixes himself a couple drinks, cracks a few beers. He would later claim he wasn't drunk when he decided to head down the alleyway to neighbor Christie's house. They were somewhat friends. They talked regularly, daily even. Todd had wanted something more, and to his disappointment, she had expressed interest in just about everyone she knew, except him. They had seen each other earlier that night. He had been over there before dinner and knew that Christie's parents were leaving for the evening, that she would be home with her younger siblings, alone.
I was babysitting. I had a younger brother and sister. They were 5 and 3 at the time.
Todd walks the alleyway to her house and knocks on the door. Christie answers, and Todd tries to get her to come outside. She refuses. She couldn't leave her siblings alone. Todd leaves, but comes back again and again, finally claiming there's a boy she liked in the alleyway. Eventually, Christie submits.
He was very persistent. When he had come to the back door, he said, just come out. And I thought, maybe I'll finally get rid of him. And when I got out there, that's when Todd pulled a gun out and took the gun to my head. And he said, you're coming with me.
Shocked and unsure, Christie starts down the alley, Todd following behind with the gun to her back. Thinking none of this could be real, Todd wouldn't pull a real gun on her. She turns and grabs the barrel. The hammer falls and the gun clicks. A misfire. Wordless, Christie continues to his house, now fully aware of what was about to happen.
We entered his house. I remember going down the hallway to the right, to the last bedroom on the left. He asked me to take off my clothes. I had never taken off my clothes in front of anybody ever before.
Todd ties Christie up, binds her hands behind her back, and puts duct tape over her mouth. He's put down the gun and picked up a knife. With Christie lying bound on her stomach, Todd gets on top of her and begins the assault.
First started out by sodomizing me. And I got upset and I told him, I said, you're so stupid that you don't know which place to put it.
Back at Christie's home, her little brother is terrified. He searched the house high and low for his big sister, and she is nowhere to be found. Scared, he calls the police, and Christie's parents rush home. As police arrive down the streets, the lights can be seen flashing through the neighborhood. Todd can see the squad cars parked at Christie's house through the bedroom blinds and begins to panic.
And all of a sudden, police lights showed up. He couldn't figure out what to do.
Todd's agitation is increasing. He has the gun again and is pacing. Christie tells him she won't say anything, that if he let her go, she would say they were out looking for a dog. Todd hesitates, but tells her she has to die. Christie begs him, insisting she won't say a word. Todd finally agrees, but tells her if she told anyone what happened, he would kill her brother, sister, mother, and father, and then her. Christie gets dressed and leaves out the back door, walking home down the alley. At her home, police are inside with Christie's frantic parents when she enters through the back door. Her parents rush to her and want to know where she's been. She tells them she was out looking for a dog. She insists it, even. Her father, understandably concerned and dubious of her claims, gently pressures her, and Christie breaks down, telling him everything. Officer Cable heads to Todd's house immediately after hearing the allegation. She knocks on the door, and Todd answers, only opening the door a crack. It was dark. The officer could not see Todd clearly. He was partially hidden by the door, and was wearing dark clothing in a dimly lit entranceway. She knew there was at least one gun in the house, but approached the door alone.
I conversed with Todd through the door. He said, I just need to know
How much am I going to get for this?
It was dark. Officer Cable could not make out much more than a silhouette. While they spoke, Cable catches the glint of steel from between the door crack. She would later discover he was holding a .22 caliber rifle. Instinctively, she reaches for the screen door and pulls it open, drawing her weapon at the same time.
I remember grabbing at the screen door and pulling my handgun out and just telling them, now, out right now, or I'm going to shoot you.
Todd was charged with kidnapping, sexual assault, and crimes against a child. The totality of the charges could have held more than one life sentence if convicted. During the trial, the family of the victim made statements claiming how understandably devastating the attack has been on their daughter and the whole family. Reggie would go on record as saying she was not surprised at all about the violence from Todd or the use of a gun. She was surprised, however, at the assault, as she said Todd has always been a little unsure of himself in that respect. Pre-trial, the court would examine all the evidence against Todd, the young girl's testimony, that from detectives, a multitude of character references, most of them poor, and the new string of now supporting diagnoses that came from the mandated psychological assessment to determine if Todd should be tried as an adult. It was unanimously agreed Todd was fit for trial and was transferred to adult court. Todd had very few people on his side and understood there was no escaping at least some time in jail. Hoping for extended leniency, Todd pled guilty to kidnapping in exchange for the sexual assault and crimes against a child charges to be dropped. The Honorable Kimball Rose, the judge presiding over the case, showed no empathy to Todd's defense of a broken home. It was generally accepted amongst investigators, prosecution, and likely everyone that during the evaluations and trial, Todd displayed exactly the type of behavior predicted in his psychological evaluations: self-absorption, failure to recognize fault, projection, inflated sense of ego, violent predisposition. Narcissistic and borderline personality disorders were fully manifested. Dr. Martigue, the attending psychologist for the court evaluation, noted how ambivalent Todd seemed when approaching the subject, presenting the case as, "I raped a girl and got caught." There's little doubt that Todd experienced a traumatic childhood, that his deep-rooted anger issues are a result of some kind or series of traumatic injustice as an infant or child. All of this would be suggested in the long line of analyses from attending psychologists over the years. Strangely, his parents and immediate family refute Todd's claims inconsistently. No party seems willing to admit any kind of actual wrongdoing. There seemed to be no hope for juvenile rehabilitation, and in October of 1987, Todd would be sentenced to 15 years in adult prison and would be required to register as a sex offender upon release. On October 29th, Todd Kohlhepp would begin serving his sentence at the ASPC Amen Complex in Florence, Arizona. Not surprisingly, Todd failed to understand the reasoning behind the sentence, feeling it was too harsh. During the entirety of the Loctite investigation and trial, he would tell detectives and the court he was sorry, that the whole thing messed him up too, probably, and that he didn't know the girl was only 14. Todd asked his mother to write a letter to the parole board, hoping his now active and upstanding mother can help. In the letter, Reggie pleads for her son's release in a long line of contradictory statements that falls away to an almost desperate rambling. She blames Will for Todd's sudden change in behaviors, makes false claims about his psychological history, and has almost the same naivete and ambivalence about her son as he does about himself. Writing, "I am also a court reporter, and I've seen a lot. Never have I seen this happen to a 15-year-old child, and not even any help offered. They don't stop to think that he even walked the girl home. Does that sound like a dangerous criminal? He even walked the girl home." Todd would serve the majority of his time in medium security, only being under close observation and maximum security a handful of times. Throughout his sentence, he would be involved in a number of infractions. Nothing major, unsurprisingly, mostly fights with other inmates. Academically, Todd completed his GED and eventually pursued and obtained a degree in computer science. November 24th, 2001, having served 14 years of the 15-year sentence, Todd is released back into society. He would move to Spartanburg, South Carolina, where he promptly registered as a sex offender. For any convicted criminal in any state, having a criminal record is a very big hurdle upon release. The stigma of serving time and limits to travel and industries you can work, so many factors play into the often crumbling confidence and drive of even the most tenacious would-be reformed. Todd, however, seemed to get by okay, securing work as a graphic designer and attending college, even pursuing and acquiring his pilot's license. He moved from a fresh-out convict to comfortable middle-class living quickly. Throughout the late 90s and early 2000s, street bike communities have grown as quickly as two-wheeled performance technology has advanced, explosively and popular with a specific breed of Top Gear enthusiasts. The age of bulky road warriors and cafe racers was over, eclipsed by the quest for Top Gear and redlines. Gixxers and CBRs, Ninjas and YZs flooded the streets, daredevils screaming past at over 200 kilometers an hour, stunting and showboating in the most masculine of ways. This live truly fast, die-hard lifestyle portrayed by faceless crotch rocket speed junkies appealed immediately to Todd's twisted sense of taking life by the horns. Todd liked fast cars but didn't know much about bikes. He had never ridden one. A step straight into street bikes, specifically performance-tuned, was a bold move for the, at most, casual two-wheel enthusiast. Most people would start on something small, especially if they've never ridden a bike. In Spartanburg, a dirt bike perhaps, light and still fast, with all the ability to kill yourself on and off the road. One might say a dirt bike is a rite of passage that can't be skipped. This didn't stop Todd, and with no knowledge and very little research, he drove to Boiling Springs to buy a bike. Superbike Motorsports was a relatively new but quickly growing sport bike performance store and garage. Scott Ponder, the owner, was a bit of a local legend, a lifetime virtuoso mechanic and tenured Superbike Pro-Am. In the early 2000s, he had earned a reputation as a guru of sorts, a true mascot for the industry. If you wanted a bike in Spartanburg County, this is where you went. Todd was understandably awkward while talking with the salesman. With any first approach to something new, it's sometimes easy to forget that everyone starts a beginner. Unwarranted thoughts and confused nervousness tends to take over when speaking with people clearly your senior in the subject. This is only natural. Most people internalize these fears when approaching the unknown, and listen with humility and intent to learn. Todd would forego these courtesies and boast about his fabricated knowledge and experience. Todd's obviously feigned tenure as a bike enthusiast became almost comical. The classic little man in a big truck. Despite the good intentions of the store staff in urging Todd to reconsider his purchase, a street bike meant for a veteran rider. Perhaps in spite, he bought the bike anyways. A week later, and Todd has realized he's indeed bought the wrong bike. Top speed came fast for each gear, and Todd couldn't keep up. He eventually gathered his pride and attempted to return the bike, or in the least, exchange it for another more suited to his experience. He would say the store declined for any number of possible reasons. Todd's self-induced humiliation continued with the alleged ambivalence of the store employees. 3 days later, and Todd's bike is allegedly stolen from his parking spot at home. Conveniently, perhaps, and after an odd run of strange interactions that allegedly transpired between Todd and Superbike Motorsports in the days that followed. Todd is convinced they are behind the theft. He would lament this perceived and perhaps fabricated injustice with varying degrees of anger, sometimes in passing, suggesting a more aggressive retribution.
You had 4 bodies.
Superbike Motorsports, a bike shop in the middle of rural Chesney, South Carolina, bringing in nearly $100,000 a month. Life was good until November 6th, 2003.
Apparently everybody's been shot up here. His mama's been shot, the mechanic's been shot, and the owner.
We found 4 individuals. They were all dead. They had appeared to have been shot.
A major murder investigation opens up for a sheriff's department staffed with dozens of investigators who had never experienced any case like this, searching for the answer to their biggest question: why?
Figuring out was one of the victims the actual target, and the other people, were they just casualties? Was the business the actual target? It really torn our resources and
June 14th, 2006, Todd applies for a real estate license with the state of South Carolina. His criminal record should have been a non-starter. With his application, Todd submits a letter to the commission explaining the nature of his criminal offense. In it, he claims the charge is a misnomer. He says he and his girlfriend got into an altercation over another boy and discussed this at his house, before jointly leaving to search the neighborhood for a lost dog. When concerned parents called police after being unable to contact her, they arrived to his house and found a gun. This, as Todd would claim, was the sole reason for the charge. Less than 2 weeks later, on June 22nd, 2006, Todd's application was approved. He would start working for an independent broker in Spartanburg, watching and learning. Todd's domineering nature and self-absorbed confidence seemed to work for him, and in no time at all, Todd would purchase a 95-acre estate in Woodruff, a sprawling piece of land with the comfort of a private and affluent neighborhood out the front door, and many forested pockets and hidden valleys out the back. Now a successful and relatively known realtor, he would branch out on his own and corner a large piece of the Spartanburg market under his own banner. Successful independently, Todd expands his home office to include commissioned realtors, and Todd Kohlhepp and Associates is formed. The associates were many and never stayed in Todd's employ for too long. He was notoriously overbearing and had a fierce temper. More than one ex-coworker can recall a time when they felt fear for their safety. Despite this, it was generally agreed that Todd was mostly harmless. Although lonely, life was good for Todd, to Todd. Abundance was becoming a way of life. His penchant for things an obvious trademark of his shallow and self-absorbed character. Still with no real friends, Todd's life of solitude went from one of longing to that of a twisted acceptance. Despite having a handful of relationships throughout his post-jail life, none of them seemed to pan out. Todd's explosive temper and singular way of speaking to people was something no one endured for any amount of real time. An inevitability with older age, he would date a few single mothers, relationships that kept together for just a little longer than usual, if only for the children. Post-relationship, Todd's twisted attachment to the children would turn him into that of the weird uncle, the one that only comes around with gifts every couple months. Despite the face value of these actions, they seem to be more about himself rather than supplementing a stable and healthy life of a child through being a good role model. His entire life, it seems, Todd only ever felt things skin deep.
You are connected. Error.
Thank you once again for watching or listening. As this episode comes to an end, I find myself looking back with gratitude at the previous trilogy. Chris Watts was certainly healthy for my channel, and I want to welcome all the new subscribers. 7 months ago, when I started this project, I would have never believed this channel would be where it's at now. Amazingly, over 8,000 subscribers, and rising every day. I feel all at once inspired and empowered with every comment, view, and new subscription, and it's also entirely humbling. I still feel like I have a long way to go, but each episode I move forward with a newfound confidence, and I have all of you to thank. My patrons. As promised, all proceeds from Patreon have gone back into this channel. First, a new microphone, and now, all the music heard in this episode, and every episode moving forward, is licensed solely because of you and your gracious contributions. Thank you for helping me get closer to fully realizing my vision. I'm proud to say, my beloved patrons, you now truly are my producers. Carol File, Amanda Atkinson, La La La, La La La, Teresa Moore, Kyra L. Irvin, Paul B., Tracy Knapp, thank you. Erica Reed and Andy Painter, I saw you there. Todd's life as a child, while undoubtedly traumatizing, is largely under question. The abuse he very likely experienced is muddled by the multiple different and often contradicting statements from Todd and his family. Certainly scarred, his preteen troubles would foster and grow as an adult, placing him cleverly in the grasses of the snake he has proven to be. Before his capture in 2016 for an entirely unrelated incident, Todd would briefly be under suspicion for a quadruple homicide in Boiling Springs. The case would go unsolved for over 13 years, until Todd strangely implicates himself in the murder. We will take a look at the 4 lives lost: Scott, Beverly, Brian, and Chris, the strange wild goose chase investigation, and the 13 years over which the case would go unsolved, in part 2 of the Todd Kohlhepp Trilogy, with Something Criminal.
fairly decent foot with me. I started buying him model planes. Over a period of time, things started shifting, though. His way of dealing with people and trying to be overbearing and bullying type, that was something that really bothered me. And he more or less stated he was having trouble or he couldn't seem to find friends.
Not brave enough to shoulder. We break, embrace, cave in. We need oxygen.
My heart absolutely goes out to those people. And I feel such shame. I feel so ashamed that my son hurt them.
Of course, we also, you remember, talked to Kohlhepp's mother. She spoke with me shortly after he confessed to Superbike. She has since passed away, but at that time she was saying tearfully that she was very, very afraid he would get the death penalty. In fact, she really kind of conveyed she didn't think he would be able to escape it.
Known Todd for probably 4 or 5 years. He's been our neighbor here. And I think he came about 4 or 5 years ago. Todd was very private. The only time that I would see him is when he would come to the mailbox or leave or come back home. Todd was, in my opinion, was a likable guy. He never used any foul language when we were talking. I mean, that's just terrible for anyone to do, to lock a young lady up, and maybe even worse than that. It's just very, very upsetting. We didn't think anything about it because we didn't see anything that was unusual about, our neighbor up until this time. My first reaction, and I hate to say it, but my first reaction is a baseball bat. But I know that I am not to take that into my own hands. That's up to law enforcement people and God.